Hey guys, tonight we step off a narrow street of stone and lamp glow, and you let the cool air of a late Ottoman evening brush your face like a silk sleeve. The moon hangs low, slightly smug about its lighting job, while the alley funnels you toward a doorway bright with brass and chatter. You probably won't survive this, by which I mean you probably won't survive staying awake all the way through, because the combination of warm coffee, steam, soft lute notes, and backgammon dice is about to lull you into the best kind of surrender. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the little constellation of places and clocks in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease around a crate and step over a thread of spilled lamp oil that mirrors the stars. Your sandals whisper on the worn threshold. Inside, the room opens like a held breath, and you float into a small universe built from cushions, cedar, and the slow pulse of a brazier. You make a quiet entrance the way a cat does, pretending not to notice everyone while noticing everything. In the corner, an old copper sesve perches over coals, and each bubble that rises is a small moon of foam. The owner nods, as if he's known you for years, which in coffeehouse time means he recognized at least 3 familiar habits: how you scan for the back wall, how you touch the tabletop to feel if it's cool, how your eyes count the boards set out for tavla, the beloved backgammon. A tray swings past with tiny cups, white on the inside so the brew's darkness looks deeper, and you take your place against a wall painted the color of toasted sesame. You inhale, bitter and sweet, cardamom whisper, a ghost of smoke from the charcoal, and that comfortingly academic scent of old paper, because somewhere a scribe keeps records that no one reads until a century later when, surprise, someone does. A pair of dice rattle in a felt cup. A player releases them carefully, like birds that might bolt. That click-clack belongs to this room the way a heartbeat belongs to a chest. It anchors you. That rhythm, while your eyes adjust to the constellation of lamps, the flames lean a little whenever the door sighs open, and the shadows lean with them, eavesdropping on the gossip that hums gentle, elliptical, like people trying to share a secret without ever actually saying the secret. Your neighbor mentions prices for walnuts. Someone answers with a couplet, softly, the way you might hum a meme under your breath so only the person beside you hears. You catch a line about the docks at Galata and a vendor's cart with wheels that squeak like an anxious mouse. You don't interrupt. You rest your elbows and let the night tutor you in the art of listening. The mainstream fact settles beside you with the confidence of a regular. Ottoman coffeehouses take root here in the mid-16th century, and Istanbul becomes the capital of the coffee habit. People still name a pair of Syrian entrepreneurs, Hakem from Aleppo and Shams from Damascus, who open a famed house in Tatakale around 1554. You sip to that, the foam touching your lip like a polite handshake. Historians still argue whether that was truly the first in the city, or if smaller, quieter places brewed earlier in back rooms. But the point sleeps softly. By tonight, coffee houses are the city's second circulation system. You tuck your legs under you and accept a saucer so small it feels like a toy for precise adults. The server slides your cup forward with the elegance of a boatman nudging off ashore. Sweetness kisses the rim. The first taste blooms into chocolate, stone, dusk, and the faintest rumour of lemon. It's a brew that knows its backstory beans from Yemen, hauled across the Red Sea, up the Hejaz, shepherded by hands that learned the patience of heat and grind. A joke crosses your mind and you let it pass like a friendly stray. Yes, you are currently drinking history, but please, no chewing, this is not granola. Across from you, 2 men angle a tavla board so the light finds the pips. Checkers sit in their neat home rows like soldiers pretending not to fidget. One player adjusts his ring to exactly the right underlamp sparkle. Another taps a die against his thumbnail, counting like a priest of probability. You note their courtesy. The quiet Ivala of acknowledgement, the patience during a long bear-off. If sports had lullabies, this would be one pattern. Pause. Pattern. Pause enough to relax even a brain that alphabetizes its to-do list at 2 a.m. You know who you are. Someone at the doorway laughs. It's a soft, contained thing. The laugh of people who live near power and prefer their jokes folded, not loud. A boy shuffles in with a tray of water glasses. Each one holds a sliver of lemon, like a tiny crescent moon. You accept one and take a cooling sip between coffee sips, because you are civilized and because your tongue appreciates not being broiled. A fringe tidbit drifts through the room like an uninvited but charming breeze. Leave a little foam untouched at the rim, and some swear it brings good fortune to the next roll. Superstition, or strategy-adjacent placebo, your call. You let a ring of foam remain, partly out of courtesy, partly because it looks like the coffee is wearing a tiny hat, and you are not a monster. The owner polishes a brass tray with a cloth so soft it could be a cloud fragment. He glances at you the way keepers do when they hope a guest is settling in for the long haul. 2, maybe 3 cups, a board game, a poem, a secret. Your shoulders release. The room, it seems, has enough space for both conversation and quiet. In one pocket of air, a murmured ghazal rides a rhythm of syllables. In another, a merchant compares raisins like a jeweler comparing stones. You drift between them without moving, proof that drifting can be an art form. Joke 2 lands with the gentleness of a cushion. Your posture finally remembers what chairs have been trying to teach you for years. A man near the wall runs prayer beads through his fingers. Slow, thoughtful, like counting blessings and forgetting to stop. Another traces a coffee ring on the table with the base of his cup and turns it into a map 2 islands. A strait, one brave little archipelago of drops. If this were your map, you'd label the islands rest and stillness, and the strait the after-work hour. Around you, sleeves brush wood, dice kiss felt, spoons stir quietly. There are rules here, but they're the sort that make you feel freer. Talk soft, pour steady, don't gloat when luck loves you, and nod when fortune looks away because she will look back. She always does. The open door brings a draft that grazes the flame. The shadow of the cup's handle stretches like a lazy cat and then curls. You realize the room's acoustics are a gentle conspiracy, plaster and wood capturing chatter, softening sharp syllables, feeding them back as a comfortable hush. The ceiling beam above you holds a ghost of charcoal. Someone must have bumped a brazier once, long ago. You tilt your cup, and at the bottom a crescent of grounds lounges like a tiny shoreline. A third joke swirls in, sleepy and harmless. If you stare any longer at those grounds, they might start charging rent. The fringe belief rides on your next blink. Some swear you can read a future in patterns of grounds, sketches of tomorrow etched in coffee ink. Tonight, you keep it simple. Your prediction is easy. Another sip, the soft clatter of beginning a game, the slow tidal pull of drowsiness. You're here to learn, gently, how this room balances chance and custom, and how those wooden checkers move like polite comets from star to star. Later, you'll notice openings and bold splits. For now, you notice breath, warmth, and the fact that a city can hold its citizens like a lullaby. For a moment, you listen past the room. Street cats negotiate softly in the alley. A late messenger jogs by, sandals ticking like a modest metronome. Somewhere a boatman coughs into his sleeve and sets an oar. The city's map folds into your sense of calm. Each neighborhood a page, each page a deep, slow inhale. When you exhale, your shoulders go lower. You fit. The cup fits your hand, the dice fit the evening, and the evening fits you. An easy garment, stitched from habit and hospitality. You angle your cup to admire the little hat of foam you respectfully left in section 1, then glance toward the brazier where the real lullaby begins. The sesve, that long-handled copper pot, rides the ember heat like a tiny ship at the edge of a red sea. The owner measures beans that have travelled farther than some people's ambitions. Yemeni berries dried under the same sun that baked caravans into patience, and he grinds them to a powder so fine it makes talc look chunky. The sound of the hand mill is soft but insistent, a hush, scrape hush that settles into your ribs. You're already calmer because the ritual is about small commitments, a measured spoon, a level flame, and the kind of attention that doesn't need to brag. You lean closer and the sesve inhales. Water, sugar if you asked for sekali, nothing if you chose sade, coffee dust, and just a whisper of cardamom for those who like their dreams perfumed. No stirring yet. The pot sits still, handle pointing like a compass needle to true north. Sleep. The mainstream fact pads over and curls at your feet by the late 1500s. The port of Mocha is famous across the Ottoman world for shipping beans. Mocha isn't a chocolate promise back now, but a geography lesson in a cup. Heat licks the copper. Bubbles start like secret applause beneath the surface. You feel your shoulders unknot when the first dark swell climbs, and, with the tiniest tilt of the wrist, the brewer coaxes foam toward the lip without letting it break. You're not supposed to boil the coffee into a tantrum. You're supposed to lead it like a dance. He draws the pot back, lets the foam settle, then returns it twice, sometimes thrice, raising that crown again and again until the surface looks like silk that remembered to breathe. Historians still argue whether the triple rise is an old constant or a later flourish sold to tourists of another century. But even the debate has a soothing cadence, like two scholars nodding over the same page from opposite chairs. What you know, here and now, is that the timing is tactile. A tremble at the meniscus, a hush from the coals, the way the foam thickens into kaimak, that delicate lid you absolutely do not blow on unless you like being silently judged by everyone within spoon range. A server warms the tiny cups, Finken, by nestling them near the brazier so your first sip won't shock the brew. It's a detail that whispers, "We planned for your comfort." The brewer lifts the sezva and pours a little foam into each cup first, like laying down a soft mattress, then rotates his wrist to share the liquid evenly, the darker heart of the pot saved for those who enjoy their nights a shade more profound. You notice the spoons, miniature, moonbright, some with strings of enamel dots like the night sky caught on silver. Joke one strolls in, unhurried and polite. These spoons are so small you feel virtuous automatically. Surely anything you put in your mouth with them has zero consequences. You cradle the cup and let the steam do most of the talking. Cardamom, caramel, a memory of orange peel from the sack that once lived near citrus. Smoke from the charcoal manages to be both rustic and exacting, like a scholar who gardens. The owner uses a pinch of sugar, as if telling the coffee a story about sweetness rather than drowning it. Your tongue appreciates his narrative restraint. You let the foam touch your lip, because you are a civilized person now, and then the first sip folds across your palate, bell-like, a small resonance that rings down your throat, and into the space behind your sternum where worries usually perch like noisy birds. The birds blink at each other, yawn, and tuck their heads under their wings. A fringed tidbit floats down to your table like a feather. Some old hands swear that tapping the sezva's handle with the back of a fingernail, right as the foam rises, calms the boil, and teaches the coffee not to run. Does copper have ears? Possibly not, but the soft tick on metal is undeniably satisfying, and ritual has a way of becoming true simply because everyone agrees to treat it tenderly. Another superstition murmurs through the room. Add a drop of cold water to the pot at the very end to seal the foam and your fortune. You watch one brewer do just that, and nod as if you have evidence because, in the laboratory of comforts, this counts. You stir the cup once, careful not to puncture the foam completely, and remember the map you traced from coffee rings earlier. Grounds drift toward the bottom, drafting a shoreline of sleep. The texture is almost creamy, a function of the unfiltered method that gives Ottoman, Turkish, Greek. Let's not start an argument. We'll get to that later. Coffee its body. You might have expected grit, but it's more like velvet with an opinion. Joke. Two grins in the doorway. You consider asking the owner for a decaf option, and then decide you'd rather not be discovered as a 21st century time traveller before you finish your cup. Across the room, a boy measures sugar with a knife tip, drawing a tiny dune and sliding it off into the sezve like rescuing a sleeping ant from a ledge. Another hand scatters cardamom pods on the table, cracks one, and the air goes greener, almost menthol bright. The scent reminds you that coffee houses aren't just about alertness, they're about savouring a measured pause. The mainstream fact fixes itself with gentle authority. In many houses, orders are given by sweetness level: sade, plain, orta, medium, sekerli, sweet. A practical vocabulary you memorize because it's fun to say, and because using it earns you a nod from the men who think words taste as good as drinks. The brewer wipes the mouth of the sezva with a cloth as soft as a sigh, then repositions the pot on a cooler ring of coals. He keeps several heat zones by moving embers into smaller constellations: hot, less hot, patient. You realize that control here isn't about dials, it's about distance and attention, and your own breathing unconsciously copies the method. Inhale, ease, repeat. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman kitchen standardized these steps across cities, or whether each neighborhood brewed with its own micro-style, like dialects in copper. Listening to the quiet pride in each pour, you vote for dialects. You practice the spoon not for stirring now, but as a metronome for your senses. Lift, watch a bead slide off, taste. The bead is heavy enough to tuck you deeper into the cushion. Your shoulder blades discover they are not required to hold up the ceiling. You glance at the tray of accompaniments, a square of locum dusted in powdered sugar that threatens to baptize your robe. A tiny glass of water to reset the palate and keep you from mistaking clarity for courage. Fringe law leans in again. Some say if the locum sticks to your teeth, your next backgammon roll will be equally sticky. Translation. Maybe lots of low doubles. You smile because luck has many disguises. and sugar is one of its favorite masks. Someone at the neighboring table mutters about beans. Yemeni, yes, but also Ethiopian memories, Red Sea winds, merchants who learned each port's mood. A mainstream thread unspools. The empire's reach moves the bean along imperial arteries, and the brew becomes a shared practice from Sarajevo to Cairo. The difference between kitchen and coffeehouse is subtle but real. Here, the public ritual smooths strangers into neighbours. Historians still argue whether the earliest Ottoman adopters took their spice cues from Sufi lodges or from Yemeni street stalls, but your cup argues that influence behaves like steam expanding to fill whatever vessel it finds. A gentle correction passes from counter to table. Don't blow. Let the foam sink at its leisure, or lift it with the spoon and sip beneath. You comply, and the sweetness arrives intact. You decide that patience tastes like caramel if you let it. Joke 3 raises a quiet eyebrow. If self-control had a marketing department, this is the product shot. You keep the spoon in your left hand like a tiny scepter of reasonable decisions, and watch the surface relax, big bubbles giving way to small, then to sheen, then to quiet. You set the cup down and admire the tide line. It leaves another map, another archipelago proof that stillness can have coastlines. By the brazier, a second sesva starts for the table of tavla players, who have begun to eye their board like cartographers about to redraw a continent. You'll join them soon, but not quite yet. There's a final detail to absorb. The handle's length keeps the brewer's knuckles cool. The flared lip pours without dribbling. The copper's thinness translates heat into information. In a world of loud declarations, the sesva whispers facts to anyone willing to lean in. The pot's conical belly remembers every cup it has ever raised. The blackened bottom carries a quiet resume of coals. You breathe, and the room obliges, inhaling and exhaling with you, a slow duet. When you finish, a crescent of grounds winks from the bottom. You resist flipping the cup to read your fortune. Tonight you're content to predict only that your next move will be gentle. You place the empty on its saucer, and the little chime it makes says, "Ready." The brazier murmurs approval. Your fingers know where they're going next. Toward wood, toward dice, toward patterns you'll soon recognize like lullabies. You slide your empty cup a thumb's width to the left, just enough room for words to land, and let the coffeehouse's second talent take the stage. The small talk that isn't small at all. Your table neighbours tune their voices to cushion volume, that intimate register where sentences arrive like folded notes. A merchant rolls a walnut between finger and thumb, testing the shell the way a listener tests an idea, and says the harbour was all braided ropes and bad temper at dusk. Another replies with half a couplet, clipped and elegant, and the room nods in that collective way. A room nods when form and feeling have held hands and behaved. News here travels without a uniform, dressed instead in the common coat of "I heard." You hear of figs measured miserly at the market, and a scow that listed like a sleepy mule and still delivered its cargo. One voice mentions a caravan from Diyarbakir that walked 17 days under a sky so clear you could count the spaces between the stars. A second voice answers with verse a line from Baki, polished like a brass fincan, and a third translates for the uninitiated, including you, because hospitality applies to meanings too. Joke 1 curls up beside the dice cup. You realize you're getting the day's bulletin, but it's being delivered via poetry, which is how you wish more emails worked. You let the gossip arrange itself on your table like checkers awaiting their opening. There's weather news, the Bosphorus wind behaved itself. For once in commodity news, walnut prices might stop climbing if the river barges keep their promises. Then a man with ink-stained fingers begins to recite, and a hush falls that is not commanded but invited. The Meda does not stand on a stage. He simply sits taller in his corner and lets his face become a set of shutters, opening and closing to let expressions through. He switches voices like lanes in a gentle street. Now a pompous tax clerk, now a sailor, now a mother bargaining down the cost of candied quinces. You sink into the cushions until your bones believe in pillows. A mainstream fact walks in as confidently as a regular at midnight. By the 17th century, Ottoman coffeehouses are famous as places where Meda and Ashik storytellers and poet-musicians perform, weaving news and anecdote with verse so deftly no one trips over the seams. You catch the refrain of a travelling song, something about roads and hands, and the room hums along, not loudly, but like cats agreeing that a patch of sun is excellent. Historians still argue whether such performances sparked political dissent, or mostly served as social glue, but from your cushion the effect is simple. Strangers become neighbours, and rumours, when sung, lose their sharpest edges. Your seatmate traces another map in a coffee ring, call it the Sea of Explaining Things to Newcomers, and points his spoon north. Galata, he says, and sketches a tiny boat by dragging the spoons back through the sheen. Kasım Pasha, he adds, dotting the surface with sugar, as if dropping lanterns along a quay. You laugh softly and add your own marsh of how to sleep at a reasonable hour. A cartographer with the good sense to acknowledge swamps. Joke 2 pats the table. Somewhere a planner inside you is taking notes with an invisible pen, pretending this counts as productivity. It does. Rest is an infrastructure project. At the far cushion, a man whose beard has learned patience recites Fuzuli's famous lament for love and learning, and the line about tears gets an appreciative murmur. Tears always test well in rooms with steam. Between lines, small talk returns to its beat. The ferry's new captain is said to be kind to sparrows. The bread today had a good crust, like a well-made argument. The moon last night wore a halo that made worries look briefly ornamental. A quirky tidbit flutters down and perches on your saucer. Some reciters tuck a clove under the tongue to keep their breath sweet through long couplets, practical poetry, the kind your nose can endorse. You consider trying it, then remember your cup's tiny hat of foam would disapprove of any sudden spice additions and behave. The boy with the water refills glasses, slipping slices of lemon into each as if the room needs little moons to keep it balanced. You learn the etiquette of interruption. You don't, unless you're adding a rhyme, an image, or a question shaped like a gift. When a rumour slinks in about a ship from Venice carrying glass the colour of melted mornings, someone counters with a stanza, praising transparency as a moral virtue. Your neighbour winks and says, and as a shopping goal, which earns the room's friendliest eye roll, you sip, and the lemon's whisper nudges the coffee's bass notes higher. A thin booklet passes hand to hand, wrapped in cloth the way you might swaddle a newborn notion. It's a copied page, not a printed sheet. This is still the age when news has to be chased like a skittish goat, but it carries an account of a provincial governor's inspection, with enough dates and place names to satisfy the sternest eyebrows. The scribe near you tilts his head to hear the numbers better. He will copy them later into a ledger nobody expects to be read and that somebody will eventually treasure. Historians still argue whether these manuscript newsletters were the proto-newspapers of the empire or just the tidy dreams of bureaucrats. But you can feel them doing quiet work, rounding facts into shareable shapes. A soft dispute rises near the brazier about whether cardamom belongs in the coffee always or only when your cousin visits from Aleppo and you want to look refined. The debate is warm, not hot, the kind of exchange that polishes everyone in proximity. Joke 3 taps the saucer. You declare yourself a moderate and earn the political safety of those who like both desserts at the banquet. Someone settles the matter with a couplet that pairs cardamom with moonlight and plain coffee with honest sleep. The room votes by smiling. You catch a snatch of military news, nothing alarming. A garrison rotated, somebody's nephew proud spliced with market arithmetic, and the schedules of boats, prayers, and mothers. A mainstream detail leans in. Coffeehouses become known as places where court decrees and city announcements are read aloud, sometimes by the literate for the listening, turning policy into sound and sound into memory. The ink-fingered man obliges, reading a short notice about bridge repairs with enough dignity to make beams stand straighter. A craftsman raises his cup to municipal competence, and the room toasts lightly to the idea that maintenance deserves applause. Between these currents, poetry keeps laying its quiet roads. A young Ashuk, cheeks still negotiating with the idea of a beard, tunes his saz and tests a melody that makes every oil lamp look more thoughtful. He sings of a moon caught on a nail, of home stretched between two hills like a hammock, of the mercy in a shared spoon. Your eyelids go velvet. The boy's voice is untrained in the best way, all sincerity and road dust, and the few missed notes feel like scuffs on beloved shoes. You feel your spine soften into the cushion, as if the wood beneath learned compassion. Across the room, a woman in a travelling cloak, face framed by practiced discretion, shares a story of the Bursa silk market told entirely in colours. Pomegranate peel, cloud, prayer rug, river stone. The adjectives taste like candies you're permitted to savour before bed. When she's done, the Meda salutes her with a flourish and offers a chaser of humour, a tale about a man who tried to haggle with a cat, unsuccessfully of course, because cats accept no counter-offers. The room laughs in ripples, careful not to wake anyone who is secretly already asleep, possibly including you. What you notice most is how gently truth lands here. The sharp corners get wrapped in verse, The heavy parts get side handles made of humor and metaphor, and the listener does not need to brace. You have had your share of hard news delivered with clang and clatter. Tonight, news arrives on slippers, and you discover it can still be clear without being loud. You place your palm on the table's mellow wood and feel the vibrations of voices. A low tide of syllables washing pebbles smooth. Your spoon does one last orbit of the cup, pure habit now. A moon circuiting a planet that has already decided on sleep, and you think of your earlier coffee ring archipelago. Add a new island. Conversation. Lush with shade and paths. On its shore, backgammon boards wait like boats with checker oars, ready to push into the night's slow current. The dice cup is a little bell that signals later, and later is the friend of rest. A final poem drifts across the room like a scarf on a railwind, and the last word blooms into silence so soft you can hear one ember in the brazier sigh. The merchant with the walnut finally cracks it, gives half to the scribe, and tucks the other half into his pocket as if saving a sentence for tomorrow. You follow the gesture with your eyes, and file its gentleness in a cabinet labelled "Things Worth Almost Forgetting So They Surprise You Again." The small talk never really stops. It just reclines. News drowses into proverb, poetry into breathing, rumour into the kind of smile that forgives itself. Your shoulders drop a final notch. The board in front of you opens with that wooden sigh you've been expecting since you walked in, and the checkers line up like polite constellations. You place your fingers on the nearest one and feel the polish of 100 evenings. The room resumes its heartbeat click, hush, click, and you let the rhythm borrow your pulse. The board opens in front of you with a buttery sigh, hinges whispering like a confidant who keeps every secret. Cedar and inlay catch the lamplight. 24 narrow triangles, points marching in alternating colours like a polite argument that will last all evening. You set your palm on the wood. It's warm from the last game, a lingering body heat that promises continuity. 15 checkers wait in their home formation, stacked like coins in tidy patience. You remember your coffee ring archipelago and smile. This is another coastline. A map of possible journeys reduced to a portable universe. You run a finger along the bar in the middle, the no man's land where stranded pieces will spend reflective time should luck become theatrical. Tonight, you and the dice are on speaking terms, but you also plan to practice the gracious art of agreeing with outcomes you didn't order. Your neighbour nudges the dice cup toward you. Felt lines the inside so the rattle sounds like rain on a distant roof, steady, private, and soothing. You shake with restraint, because there's such a thing as too much enthusiasm in a room full of beverages. The dice tumble out like tiny ambitious goats and settle into their pips, broadcasting numbers that might as well be lullabies. No doubling cube here, wrong century, wrong continent. This tavla speaks the language of 2 dice, 15 men, and the rhythm of bear-off that always feels like bedtime for checkers. Joke 1 winks. You promise the checkers you won't micromanage them and immediately begin micromanaging them lovingly. A mainstream fact pulls up a cushion. Tavla backgammon has been beloved across the Ottoman world for centuries, with roots that reach back through Persian nard to Roman tables, and even earlier boards carved with the same 24-point grammar. Coffeehouses make the game a civic heartbeat. Boards live here beside the brazier the way bread lives beside soup. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman rules in these rooms mirrored classical nard precisely, or whether local variations on opening splits, on bearing off, on permission to hit from certain points evolved into a neighbourhood dialect of play. Either way, the cadence is familiar. Enter, build, hit when courtesy allows, and always keep an eye on the long walk home. You lift a checker, feel its edge smooth with the faintest notch where a careless ring nicked it years ago, and place it with the soft click that means we proceed. The arrangement in front of you looks like architecture. 2 towers of 5 on the far point, 3 and 5 elsewhere, tidy as a recitation. The opposite formation mirrors it in the way a thought can meet its counterthought, and both decide to share a cushion. One player taps the board with 2 fingers, the quiet Ottoman equivalent of "ready?" You nod, absorbing the etiquette. Don't gloat. Say "Ayvala" to acknowledge luck's little inventions. And when you hit, return the stranded checker to the bar with gentleness, like sending a friend to fetch fresh air. A quirky tidbit lands like a feather on the felt. In some houses, players rub the dice against a knuckle, a forehead, or even the underside of the board, as if polishing away bad temper, less sorcery, more ritual calisthenics for nerves. Another custom, a single, deliberate tap on the wood before the first roll to tell the room that a little fate is about to be invited to the table. You notice a blue glass bead nazar, the eye tied to one corner of the dice cup with string thin as a whisper. It watches like an amiable chaperone, because jealousy can supposedly trip even dice. Tonight, envy is given a shiny toy and told to sit quietly. The first race begins, not with speed but with intention. You learn to count pips without hurrying, a private arithmetic that comforts simply because it continues. Move from here to there, a little stack turned into a ladder turned into a small bridge. If a blot single checker stands unaccompanied, it becomes a story about vulnerability. If you cover it, the narrative becomes friendship. 2 lamps away, a pair of regulars exchange no words at all, only taps and looks, and yet the board between them produces paragraphs. Joke 2 yawns into your sleeve. This game is just spreadsheeting with charisma, and your brain, which loves a tidy column, relaxes accordingly. The etiquette of dice is patiently proper. You throw to the right of the bar. If a die perches crooked against a checker, you re-roll without theatrics. If your neighbour's sleeve touches a die mid-tumble, the room laughs softly and seconds a re-roll. It's a house that values outcome over blame. You learn the sound catalogue too. The light clack of a single checker hopping, the fuller thud of a stack breaking politely, the quiet exhale everyone makes when a 6-5 appears like a road clearing itself. Near the brazier, someone mutters a couplet about risk and return that rhymes with your heartbeat. The attention here is open-eyed but unalarmed. You begin to understand that Tavla is meditative because it politely forbids hurry. Even hitting sending that blot to the bar is done like a bow more than a shove. Your finger lifts a captured piece with care, sets it up straight as a guest on the dividing line, and invites it to re-enter when the numbers permit. You split a pair, cover a point, and resist the flashy move that would leave a blot winking coyly in the open. The self you brought into the room agenda, wearing, task taming, keeps trying to ask the board for guarantees. The board pretends not to hear and offers you options instead. You feel how decision-making in this format is a muscle used lightly. It warms, used forcefully it knots, used rhythmically, it tires itself into gentleness. A server drifts by and refreshes your water, the slice of lemon shining like a tiny moon on station. You drink and set the glass down on a ring-shaped stain from some previous voyage. That old map approves your route. A fringe belief peeks over a checker stack. If you hum very quietly while bearing off, the dice favour the melody. The player opposite you hums something suspiciously close to the tune the Ashik sang earlier, and you swear the 5-5 arrives on cue. You respond with a 1-2 that feels like a moral lesson about modesty. The room observes without judgment. Everyone has intimate experience with both the poetry of long doubles and the prose of scrappy singles. Joke 3 stretches on the cushion. You declare yourself a minimalist and pretend you chose 1-2 for aesthetic reasons. You run a hand along the board's edge and feel indentations where a craftsman set shell or bone in an earlier life. If this is plain cedar, it still bears the ghost grammar of ornament, the imagining of triangles that might have gleamed. The tactile history pleases you. You prefer the board as it is, warmed and nicked, perfectly itself. Somewhere near the door, a small debate rekindles cardamom forever, or only with company, and someone settles it by bringing a fresh pot both ways. Etiquette, the moderator that always wins. As pieces stream home, you discover the lullaby inside the arithmetic. Bear off, bear off, bear off. A metronome that sings patience. Your hand finds its idle resting place at the board's corner, thumb and forefinger lightly touching, like keeping company with the game even when it's your opponent's turn. When you do speak, it's to say, "Buy a run, please," and wave the other roll forward. The word feels like clean linen on the tongue. You begin to suspect that half the charm of Tavla is giving yourself permission to occupy time without bending it to produce anything but this click, this hush, this smile that doesn't need a verb. A last mainstream note, to tuck under your pillow. The very layout you're touching, the mirrored points, the barred middle, the bear-off trays survives across empires and centuries precisely because it converts uncertainty into play. Historians still argue whether Coffeehouse Tavla in Istanbul leaned more conservative or adventurous in its average style. But your style tonight is an easy tide. The checkers obey, the dice advise, the board forgives. You glance at the tiny foam lip drying on your empty cup, remember that dignified little hat, and decide the same principle applies to luck. Let it settle, sit beneath. When the last checker slides off into safety, there's a small chorus of content sounds. The relax of shoulders, the returning of dice to their cup, the tuck of the board's halves folding back into themselves like a book closing after a familiar chapter. No one applauds, there's no scoreboard. Victory tonight is merely an extra cushion under your thoughts. The board's lid kisses its base, The latch hooks with a metal whisper, and you understand why these boxes are carried like instruments. They make music out of chance and patience. You glance around, noticing other games in mid-lilt, and feel the room exhale a shared sentence. Stay a while. You settle back in and let the board reopen like a familiar fan, triangles breathing out. This time you don't just float along the current, you lean into the first few ripples, the opening rolls, the little hinges that decide which doors tonight prefers. Your neighbour lifts the felt-lined cup, gives it a courteous shake, no showboating, because dice here are colleagues, not interns, and tips out a pair that land with a polite clatter. Numbers bloom. You answer with your own throw, and the room's hum recedes just enough for the board's grammar to speak clearly in your ear. A 3-1 blinks up at you, friendly and decisive. Somewhere in your bones a drum taps the obvious. Reach for the inner board and shape the famous point that seasoned players cradle like a warm stone. You nudge one checker down from 8 to 5, slide another from 6 to 5, and the bar point's elegant cousin, the 5-point, materializes. There's something wonderfully adult about it, like making your bed and feeling ridiculously accomplished. Joke 1 chuckles. You've done nothing but scoot 2 discs, the width of 3 triangles, and your brain is already handing you a certificate of excellence. Accept it. The board's tidy geometry thanks you by looking calmer. Next roll arrives from across, a 4-2, and your opponent resists the glamorous run to freedom. He folds wood inward, 8/4, 6/4, making the 4-point with that unhurried confidence you wish your morning self would bring to emails. You answer with a domestic nod, strong home, then bold steps. The mainstream fact wanders over like a regular and settles in. Travelers like Evliya Çelebi describe Ottoman coffeehouses as places where tavla rhythms are a second language. Openings and replies so common that even non-players can hum along while musicians, scribes, and janissaries trade turns at the same boards. Historians still argue whether the exact make the 5, make the 4 priority you're practicing here had already crystallized in 17th century houses or hardened later, but the pattern in your hands feels timeless enough to pass for lullaby lore. A new throw, 6-1. The numbers grin because they know they're iconic. You take 13/7, 8/7, and claim the bar point, the 7, that quiet gatekeeper which turns your board into a courtyard with a very sensible doorman. The move feels sculptural. The triangles you choose now shape the rest of the evening's sculpture. Your opponent hums something that might be a blessing for doubles players here. Hum the way shipwrights hum around new hulls and answers with 2. 1. A small but dignified try at 6/5. 13/11, nudging both home and outfield, hedging bets like a cautious poet. You like the mix. One checker strengthening your inner city, one scouting in the lanes where trouble and opportunity wear the same hat. Dice roll again. A 6-3 gives you choices. Run a back checker, all the way to 15, or respect the safer road. Tonight, you let one piece sprint, 24/15, a clean run that feels like opening a window. You're not reckless, you're airing the room. A spectator taps the board and murmurs a proverb about brave feet finding friendly stones. Another voice offers a mischievous caution. Brave feet also stub toes. Joke 2 salutes both truths and takes another sip of water like a responsible adult performing hydration as theatre. Across the way, a 5-3 shows its face and your opponent slides 8/3, 6/3, locking down the 3-point. You admire the slow construction of a little fortress. There's a joy to stacking certainty where surprises prefer to land. That's the real charm of opening theory in this room. Everybody knows the textbook lines, yet each hand still tastes like the person holding it. The scribe prefers inner board points before adventure. The janissary splits early to test your nerve. The spice merchant loves bold builders. 13/9, 13/8 on a 5-4, laying roads in the outfield the way he lays routes on maps. Historians still argue whether Coffeehouse Tavla cultivated a more positional style than soldiers' barracks play. But you can smell different schools the way you can smell different roasts, the same bean, distinct heat. You pick up another pair. 6-2. The quiet classical answer surfaces. 24/18, 13/11. A dignified split and a builder, telling chance, we are at least 2 chapters into this story. The board responds by looking suddenly conversational, far men stepping into mid-board sentences, near men lowering their voices into ready. Your neighbour rolls 4-1 and, with a pleased nod, makes the 5 from his side 6/5, 8/7, mirroring your strong point. Symmetry relaxes you. In music, mirrored phrases soothe. In tavla, mirrored anchors do the same. Then the dice blink doubles, small and neat 2-2. You are a sculptor handed 4 strokes. Some nights you'd sprint, 24 over 22, 13 over 11-2, a measured split and 2 builders. Tonight, your fingers choose inner architecture, 6/4 2, 8/6 2, heavy with safety, light with smugness. Joke 3 grins. You tell yourself you're setting future you up for success, which is bedtime's version of leaving the sink empty of dishes. Your opponent lifts his eyebrows in the international language of reasonable, then answers with 3-2, 24 over 21, 13 over 11, a split that gives his backmen good manners and his outfield a little sparkle. Around you, the house culture adds its tiny rituals. A quirky tidbit flits in. Old hands here sometimes pass the dice across a book of verse before the opening roll, as if asking the poem to edit out any grammatical errors of luck. Others rest the cup for a heartbeat on the board's bar. 3 slow taps, a small pact with patience. One elder tucks a blue bead under the cup between throws. So envy has something to do besides bother us. You're agnostic but delighted. Rituals are just lullabies for the hands. Another opening family visits. 4-3 arrives, and you briefly eye the romantic runner. 24 over 20, 13/10, then settle for the home improvement move 8/5, 6/5, because making that 5-point again, from your fresh game, never feels wrong. A merchant leans over and whispers an aphorism. The 5-point is a pillow. Never say no to pillows. Your side of the inner board grows plush. Outfield builders wait like patient scaffolds. When 5-4 turns up, you lay 24 over 20, 13/8 with a craftsman's shrug. Yes, it can be hit, but today you trust the room's soft air and your opponent's yawns. You keep noticing how openings are less about memorizing orders than about loosening your shoulders into better choices. The rules are, simple move 2 numbers, each die applied to a single checker, unless doubles give you a quire. But the undertones are social. Don't bully a good roll, don't sulk at a bad one. Point making early is like lighting lamps before dusk. The mainstream note drifts back in. From Cairo to Sarajevo, tavla openings echo across the empire's coffeehouses, one of the few shared scripts in an otherwise wonderfully dialectal set of customs. Historians still argue whether the Persian Nard's classic split and slot pedagogy directly fathered your preferred modern sequence, or if the coffeehouse age evolved its own chapter headings, but your hands are suddenly bilingual, announcing old grammar, thinking in tonight's slang. A 2-1 hovers. Slot the 5 with 6/5, and give yourself a builder with 13 over 11, or play the social butterfly and make the 11 with 13 over 11, 13 over 12. You choose the small dare, slotting the 5, because even your sleepy self enjoys a tasteful risk. The room does not scold. Leaving a lightly guarded blot this early is the kind of risk that keeps the narrative interesting without changing the rating to too exciting. Your opponent obliges with no hit, rolling 6-5 and sweeping a backchecker forward in a satisfying arc. 24 over 13, a parade move that earns a whisper of admiration from the cushions. By the time a 5-5 finally dances onto the felt O, the hush that follows you move with measured joy. 13/8, 2, 8/3, 2. The kind of vaulting that turns space into ownership without turning your face into a billboard. Doubles are a lullaby sung loud. Everyone hears them. No one is surprised when your voice carries. Your neighbor smiles as if he wrote the music and lets you finish the verse. The early game settles into mid-game posture, and you notice what the openings have done to your mind. Smoothed it, angled it, given it comfortable rails. You're not racing, you're rocking. Each first decision was a little act of furniture arrangement, and now every step to the kitchen in the dark is safer. The dice cup returns to your palm, felt cool and reassuring. You give it a short, friendly shake, and think of the Sesve's triple rise earlier, the way ritual brings foam to the surface, and then eases it back. Again, again. Openings are like that. Little ascents that promise the gentlest of descents. Before you roll, you glance at your empty cup and the lemoned water standing sentry. Your inner board, with its neat 5 and 4 points, looks like a bedroom tidied before sleep. The outfield builders resemble slippers placed where your feet will find them in the dark. You breathe in the charcoal, the cardamom, the beeswax that someone used on the board long ago. Then you let the dice go, 2 white moons tumbling toward whatever sky the next move needs. Your opening games have arranged the room inside your head, 5-point fluffed like a pillow, builders placed like slippers. And into that tidy space the characters step as if they've been waiting in the doorway for you to notice. First comes the Meda, the storyteller with the kind of face that looks pre-wrinkled for expressions. A man who can pour voices the way the Sesve pours foam. He doesn't stand on a box. He just lifts one eyebrow, and somehow a stage grows under it. His walking stick is not for walking. Tonight it is a sultan's scepter, then a miser's tally, then a fisherman's oar. He taps it once against the board's bar, the universal click that means attention, and the coffee house spins a little quieter, like a top settling into balance. He begins with a merchant who mistakes a cat for a tax collector, moves to a tailor who sews a pocket in time and loses his keys inside last week, then lands on a sailor who learns 3 languages in one storm, all of them synonyms for oops. You laugh softly, the kind of laugh that stays inside your chest and makes room there. The Meda glances at your empty cup and improvises a couplet about fortunes hiding in grounds cheeky but affectionate, a nod to the fringe art of reading the dregs you've been politely not flipping onto your saucer. A mainstream fact settles beside his stick. Meda performances flourished in Ottoman coffeehouses, especially from the 17th century on, weaving gossip, moral fables, and news into miniature plays so nimble no one tripped on the seams. Historians still argue whether those storytellers were closely policed or simply practiced a subtle self-editing, laughing just loudly enough to be harmless and pointed just quietly enough to be useful. But whatever the rulebook, the man in front of you has mastered the lullaby of implication. From the doorway drifts a figure whose boots speak before he does. A weary janissary, shoulders broad, but gaze already halfway to sleep. He unhooks a leather strap, the kind that remembers weight, and lowers himself to a cushion as if negotiating with gravity. His drink order is not complicated. He takes sade, plain, and the server sets it down with that respectful thimble clink that means you've earned your silence. The janissary holds the cup like an oath, and listens to the Meda without interrupting, except once, when a joke about drill practice lands too close to the truth, and he permits himself one corner smile. Joke one strolls by with a harmless swagger. You salute his restraint by not asking him to explain the difference between training march and casual stroll, with drums. The room knows to give him a wide, gentle berth. If Tavla is available, he plays it like a map-reading exercise. Splits early, anchors like a man who slept under too many different skies. His fingers are ink-kissed at the tips, and tucked near his knee is a little shaker of pounced Sandarak powder to dry his script, because apparently he is the kind of man who takes "always be prepared" as a personal brand. He flips open a slim notebook and records exactly nothing that could alarm anyone. Prices of walnuts, a phrase about moonlight he wants to steal later, the pattern of your 3-1 opening like a musical motif he'll hum on his walk home. When the Meda hits a sharp moral, the scribe nods once. That tiny bureaucratic amen. Joke 2 raps the table gently. If you asked him for a copy of your own yawn, he could probably reproduce it from memory in 2 scripts and a marginal gloss. You ask, quietly, about his tools. He's happy to teach if teaching doesn't disturb the general hush. Reed pen split just so. The angle adjusted with a thumbnail until the nib leaves a clean, obedient line. The ink he lowers his voice for this, as if confessing a recipe frequently gall-based, which explains the solemn smell you kept mistaking for ancient library. He sprinkles pounce like dusting snow across a town square, and the letters stop glistening and start belonging. A quirky tidbit folds itself at his elbow. Some scribes swear by mixing a hint of clove oil into their ink, not for scent, but to persuade the nib to glide, as if the page were waxed. Science doubtful, satisfaction undeniable. He shrugs. If it works, it works. Historians still argue whether the average coffeehouse scribe made the news more official by writing it down or made it more social by letting anyone read it, but you can see how his ledger will outlive the room's echoes. Then there's the spice merchant, who arrives smelling like an overachieving breeze. He carries his shop with him, ghosts of pepper and cinnamon, cheap stowaways like fenugreek, glamorous passengers like saffron. He sits, and the air leans closer. He has the jangly cheer of a man who haggles for breakfast and naps like a saint. If the janissary rolls dice like drum patterns, the merchant rolls them like handfuls of cloves tossed in the air just to watch them sparkle. He opens with build as always, because of course he does. He is in the business of laying foundations you can taste. Mainstream detail, courteous and clear. Ottoman markets feed these rooms, and the coffeehouse repays the favour by keeping commodities conversational price checks over poetry, verse over invoices, everyone a little more informed than they meant to be. He flips a pouch and a few green cardamom pods scatter, rolling to a stop near your water glass. Insurance, he grins. You grin back and do not add any to your cup because the foam remembers etiquette. The merchant leans in with a myth he refuses to label as such. There's a particular peppercorn, he says, that if sniffed before, a crucial roll will clear the mind so thoroughly even envy forgets your address. It's the kind of fringe charm you want to believe because it smells like competence. He offers you a single peppercorn. You smell it. Your next roll is 6-5, and you pretend the universe is taking bribes in spices. Joke 3 gives a harmless bow. Later you will write correlation and underline it twice like a student who just made peace with statistics. The meta wraps a story with a bowline that praises getting home in one piece, and the janissary taps his cup twice against the saucer, thanks in percussion. The scribe, moved by some line about mercy, underlines a phrase and dots the I with unusual zeal. The spice merchant buys a second round for your cushion and explains that generosity, like cumin, travels farther when toasted gently first. You listen as the room does, its secret work burnishing edges off the day, giving everyone a pocket to carry the quieter version of themselves. A mainstream ripple returns. Coffee houses in Istanbul were sometimes called schools for the wise, a compliment and a complaint depending on who was speaking. Men learned news, games, poems, and posture here. Historians still argue whether such learning unraveled old hierarchies or simply re-threaded them with softer fibre. But you have learned at least this much. Posture is contagious. The janissary's steady economizing makes you simplify your next move. The scribe's attention polishes your listening until it shines. The merchant's expansive cheer loosens your jaw and your shoulders. And the meda's voices teach you the gravity of play. Someone by the brazier starts the oud just a few strokes. No announcement. The strings thrum like warm honey. Talk lowers to make room. The janissary's eyes decide they are allowed to close between rolls. The scribe caps his ink with the deliberate dignity of a man finishing a tiny ceremony. The spice merchant counts his coins as if counting blessings. He miscounts, laughs, and starts over. No hurry allowed. You think of your earlier maps, coffee rings turn to coastlines. The board to a city and add another. A chart of temperaments that the night has aligned, like stars you can finally name. The meda, noticing your gaze, lifts his stick and pretends it's a sextant, sights you across the table, and declares in an exaggerated whisper that you have sailed successfully to the archipelago of reasonable choices. The room applauds with smiles. You incline your head as if accepting a tiny, imaginary decree. Your dice roll. They are not generous, but they are sufficient, and sufficiency tonight feels like the truest luxury. The janissary raises his cup toward you, a salute only 2 fingers tall. The scribe notes the time in a margin no one will ever read, and somehow that makes it real. The spice merchant pockets the peppercorn you didn't use. "For next time," he says, and time, the accommodating host, nods. The dice cup returns to your hand, felt whispering against your palm like a cat that has decided you are furniture. You give it one short rock and a slow swirl, no shaking the rafters, and tip 2 white moons onto the board. They tumble, kiss a checker, and come to rest with faces that seem to say, "We did our best." Your eye does the quiet arithmetic. Pips to home, pips to safety, pips to a story that ends with both of you pretending you planned it. You've learned to count in lanes, not in leaps 6 seconds live, in the long corridors. 5 seconds are the stairs you take when you're carrying tea, 4 seconds the tidy hallway, and so on, until 1 second become that last sleepy shuffle into bed. You start to hear probability as a room tone. 36 ways the 2 dice can land. A set of little doorways that open and close each turn. Doubles 6 of them hum at one pitch. The rest murmur at another. The mainstream fact pads in politely. In Tavla, as in every backgammon family, the distribution of 2 dice outcomes is fixed. There are more ways to make a 6 than a 2, and that simple slope of likelihood is the quiet physics your choices lean on. You don't need a table. Your hands remember the melody. 6 has 5 ways with a friend, but 2 only has 1, you mutter, and the janissary across from you nods in the universal language of exactly. Historians still argue whether Ottoman players routinely taught formal odds in coffee houses or absorbed them osmotically through play, but either way, the room seems fluent. Your pip counting smooths out like a well-swept stoop. You no longer add 1 checker at a time. You see clusters as chords. A stack 3 points away from home rings with a 3 gets me there, and 2 builders spaced 4 and 6 points out. Play a friendly duet. If one doesn't sing this turn, the other might. You keep a soft inventory. How many safe points you own, how many blots you've left like unattended sandals, how many rolls give your opponent permission to lecture you. It's not stress. It's more like checking that the windows are latched before sleep. Joke 1 yawns. Your brain claims this is light mental exercise, which is the exact phrase it uses right before needing a nap. Etiquette steadies the nerves that math can't. You roll to the right of the bar, lift dice only after both have truly settled, and announce ambiguous moves with the clarity of a street vendor. From 13 to 9 and 6 to 5. No need to brag. The checkers will issue their own press release. When you hit a blot, you don't spike it, you cradle it onto the bar, spine straight, a gesture that says, I am civilized and the foam on my old cup would vouch for me. When your opponent miscounts pips in the bear-off and reaches too soon, you don't pounce. You tap the point he meant and help his piece find its actual home. The room thanks small mercies. The board runs on them. Of course, chance smiles with a dimple and an agenda. You learn soft bluffs that don't break the hush, a lingering fingertip over 2 legal moves that are equal enough. You might as well choose the one that makes your opponent think about the other. A measured exhale before picking up the dice so the man across starts calculating hits you don't intend. You never weaponize noise, you weaponize silence. Your best trick is stillness, placing a builder where it invites attention, and then looking at some other part of the board as if your future is entirely elsewhere. The scribe sees through you and approves anyway. Acting is still a cousin of clarity when everyone agrees to keep it kind. You experiment with tempo, when to break a stack to scatter builders like lanterns, when to huddle and make a wall so complete your opponent has to knock politely for 3 turns. A 6-4 arrives and you consider running your back checker clean. The janissary's eyelids, half closed in that barracks-trained way of resting while watching, flutter a warning. You reframe, not escape, but timing. If you leap now, you might give your opponent late targets. If you anchor 1 more turn, you might force him to clear from the front and feed you safer exits. You choose patience. It tastes like the caramel you learned from not blowing on the foam. A quirky tidbit rolls across the felt with a wink. Some regulars carry a smooth date pit in their pocket as a luck stone, rubbed with thumb between rolls to remind the dice of hospitality. Does it work? The pit's resume is silent, but the gesture is soothing, and soothing is an advantage measured in better choices. You, being modern but persuadable, keep the peppercorn the merchant lent you earlier tucked under your palm. When the 3-1 you wanted appears, you don't look smug, you look sleepy, which is a kind of swagger in here. Gamesmanship includes knowing when to smile at fate's little pranks. Your opponent rolls double 1 second at the worst possible second, and instead of groaning, he arranges them into a pretty diagonal, 2 neat steps down a useless hallway. The room appreciates art where it can find it. You counter with a 5-2 that hits from the outfield, a respectful bop that sends one of his blots to the bar for a sip of humility. You place it gently, and breathe through your own surge of triumph. Tonight prefers chamomile, not cymbals. Joke 2 sits beside your water glass. You consider high-fiving the nazar bead tied to the dice cup, and decide its job is already difficult without your antics. Soon you're bearing off, the lullaby phase. You count exactly, not roughly. Rough counting is how pieces fall off beds. 2 off, 1 down, you murmur, letting the rhythm carry you. There's artistry in not rushing this part, in remembering that speed costs more when it tenses the shoulders. You make room for luck by stacking your trays in ranges, men on points 6 through 3 first, then tidy the low steps, so that bad rolls hurt less and good rolls sparkle more. The room's sound lowers another notch. Even the oud seems to play with mutes on, the strings whispering like felt. A mainstream thread returns with its slippers on. The Ottomans favoured tavla, as both pastime and instruction. Soldiers learned patience, merchants learned planning, scribes practiced concentration, and coffeehouses provided the stage where those skills could stay nimble without bruising anyone's pride. Historians still argue whether money regularly changed hands here, or whether stakes were often nothing but honour and more coffee. This house tonight, judging by the calm of the janissary's mouth and the scribe's relaxed ledger, seems to prefer wagers denominated in smiles. You prefer those rates too. Inflation is brutal on tempers. You practice reading the board as a weather map, where storms can form, where high pressure keeps skies clear, where one rash blot would become tomorrow's folktale. Your opponent, catching your gaze, gives you the smallest conspiratorial nod, as if to say, yes, We are both pretending we control more than we do, but it's a beautiful pretense. Chance is not a bully here. It's a collaborator with eccentric hours, showing up unannounced, bringing a loaf of good bread half the time and a riddle the other half. You learn to set a table for both. The soft bluff returns in even gentler dress. You take an obvious safe move slowly, so that the less obvious safe move looks tempting to someone who likes mirrors. It's not trickery, it's choreography. And when luck scolds you because even choreography trips, you accept the correction with a nod that teaches your heartbeat to behave. Joke, 3 pads across the cushions. You tell yourself you're collecting these bad rolls for tax purposes. The audit will be conducted by your pillow. When the last man slides home, when trays empty like quiet inboxes, you let the dice rest a moment longer on the felt than necessary. This is part gratitude, part optics. No need to seem eager to escape the minute after a victory. No need to advertise relief after a loss. You and your opponent exchange the modest bow of people who have shared a craft. The scribe notes nothing. Some results are better kept in the humming air. The janissary drains his cup, sets it down with a click that sounds like peace, and excuses himself to stretch a leg that learned too many roads. The Nazar bead blinks its friendly glass blink, satisfied that it kept envy off the furniture for another round. You slide the checkers back into their nests and find your breath has adopted the board's cadence. Pip by pip became step by step, became blink by blink, became the kind of drowsiness that doesn't argue. It just covers you like a good blanket. Chance has behaved like weather. Sometimes a breeze, sometimes a gust. Never a storm you couldn't wait out beneath the awning of etiquette. You look at the peppercorn in your palm and put it in your pocket for later, not for luck, but as a reminder that your best roll tonight was patience. You drift toward a quieter corner, where conversation walks on tiptoe and wears a veil of perhaps. The coffeehouse breathes its usual incense of charcoal and patience, but here the air tastes a shade more conspiratorial, like cinnamon that thinks it's undercover. A merchant lowers his voice and sketches a headline in steam. An edict rumoured, a fashion decreed, a ban tried on like an uncomfortable coat, then shrugged off when the sleeves pinched. You are not here to chase fire. You are here to warm your hands over the rumour's glow and decide which stories make better pillows. Someone mentions a sultan by title. Only names are sharp objects at certain hours, and the table nods the careful nod of people who have practiced discretion the way others practice scales. They speak of reforms as if describing weather fronts. A gust from the palace, a clearing over the guilds, a sudden squall in the markets. Coffee, they agree, has survived more forecasts than any humble bean deserves. The mainstream fact settles between sources with the composure of a regular. In the 17th century, coffee houses were periodically closed by decree, most famously under Murad IV, on grounds that ranged from moral worries to fears about unruly gatherings, only to reopen when the city remembered that conversation also needs addresses. Historians still argue whether Murad IV personally stalked the streets in disguise to enforce the bans, or if later storytellers sharpened that legend for better theatre. But the point wraps itself in foam and sits. Prohibition and habit have arm-wrestled in this city more than once. Your hand warms a fresh cup, and you listen to the versions become versions of versions. One man swears his grandfather hid a little sesve inside a clay jug during a crackdown, brewing a thimbleful at a time and calling it medicine when anyone frowned. Another counters with a grin that his aunt kept roasting beans in the bread oven, claiming the smell was enthusiastic crust. A quirky tidbit twirls onto the tabletop in a silver slipper. Some houses, it said, installed sand trays, not merely for the even heat. They give a seize, but to bury the hot pot quickly. If surprise inspections arrived, hide the evidence under a mirage. Whether that was common or just a storyteller's spice is unclear, but you can see the appeal. The sand looks innocent even when it's plotting. The janissary, rested now and thinking with half a smile, says, "Bans always teach hands new routes." "You close a door," he murmurs, "and we grow windows." He doesn't relish trouble, he relishes maps. Across from him the scribe taps his reed pen against the notebook's edge and says, "Reforms can be like new shoes, blistery at first, then practically polite once broken in." He speaks of guild rules revised, of coffee prices nudged by taxes that sometimes protect and sometimes peck. Historians still argue whether fiscal motives sat behind moral language, or whether morality sincerely led while revenue merely tagged along. But the scribe's eyebrow suggests that coins enjoy hiding in footnotes. Your spoon does a lazy orbit, and you think of fashion edicts as softer cousins of decrees that move cups. Someone at the next table mimics the way hats used to sit, then the way a newer style perches, and the room applauds the pantomime without declaring sides. The merchant adds that a headwear reform can feel like a new punctuation mark for the face, different commas, same sentence. You smile because that is exactly how your cup's foam feels tonight. Sometimes an exclamation, sometimes a ... Joke 1 leans its elbow on your saucer. You promise privately to accept all sartorial edits that do not attempt to regulate your bedtime. Rumours breathe around you like cats weaving between ankles. A decree about gatherings reads stern. The enforcement arrives with varying degrees of sternness depending on the officer's shoe comfort and whether he likes poetry. The Meda clears his throat and tells a soft tale about a house that pretended to be a chess club for a week, then a calligraphy salon the next, then a mutual aid for the appreciation of quiet. Everyone plays along, because play is the city's second literacy. The mainstream thread curls back in. Coffee houses have long been described as schools for the wise, sometimes admiringly, sometimes suspiciously, precisely because talk can be both glue and spark. Historians still argue whether the spark ever leapt from cup to street with the force officials feared, or whether the true revolution conducted here was the slow, civilizing one of people learning to listen before answering. Behind you, 2 men perform the ritual of cautious descent, the way musicians improvise. An oblique remark about a bridge repair that has not happened yet, a counterverse praising patience as if patience had a lobby, and a common shrug that says, "We will walk around the hole," again. You file the mood under resigned but hydrated. Your cup steadies your hand the way the board steadies your thoughts. Joke. 2 glides past in slippers. You consider forming a tiny apolitical society, the League for the Protection of Reasonable Bedtimes, and decide your pillow already serves as its head office. The spice merchant returns with 2 bits of intelligence smuggled inside cinnamon. Caravans are expected to be late. Raisins will pout. Cardamom will hold steady. He shrugs like a weather, vainly trying not to be weather. Reforms, he says, also change taste. A fashion for sweeter cups rises. Then a return to Sade asserts itself as a sign of fortitude. Then, for a season, everyone pretends to like clove because a certain poet used it in a metaphor that went mildly viral. You sip and taste the city's palate, learning and unlearning itself. The janissary proposes a toast to the middle path. Orta, the sweetness of moderation. 3 cups agree in principle and 1 in practice. A boy at the brazier whispers that inspectors went by the big house near the market yesterday, but left laughing because the owner recited a verse about prudence so charming they forgot to frown. You suspect embellishment. You accept it because embellishment is the city's perfume. The scribe notes nothing. Rumours don't like ledgers. He will, however, copy the couplet for his niece, because it rhymes in a way that makes the mouth happy. Historians still argue whether memorized verse was the city's true bureaucracy decisions recorded in mouths, not margins, but your ear believes the theory long enough to hum. You notice something lovely about these whisper hours. They sand the edges off fear without pretending danger is imaginary. A ban is discussed as weather, reforms, as fashion, edicts, as tide charts. You remember your Tavla etiquette moved gently. Accept outcomes. Don't gloat and realize the same rules keep anxiety from getting teeth. A rumor says late-night lamps will be watched more carefully in the coming week. A counter-rumor says a festival will flood the streets with lanterns anyway, and the city will look like a tray of stars. You decide that either image will do for sleep. A quirky belief gets its cameo. A regular claims that if you fold yesterday's decree into a tiny boat and float it in your water glass until the ink blurs, tomorrow's mood will be kinder. The janissary snorts softly, the scribe pretends not to hear, and the merchant, practical as bread, asks whether this also works on overdue bills. The regular says it only works on paper that tries to tell people what to do while forgetting to say please. You toast the sentiment with your lemon slice because politeness belongs in policy the way foam belongs on coffee. The Meda, sensing the room's temperature, threads a final story through the hush. How bans teach ingenuity, how fashions teach flexibility, how rumours teach discernment. He lines up the 3 lessons like checkers and bears, each one off with a wink. You recall your earlier maps, archipelagos in coffee rings, lanes on the Tavla board, and add 1 more to your pocket atlas. A coast called Whatever Comes We Pour Carefully. It isn't defiance, it's craft. The Sesve lifts and settles. The foam rises and folds. The cup warms the fingers. You remain unstartled. Joke 3 lands like a feather on felt. You decide the only decree you will enforce tonight is no decisions after midnight more complex than choosing which side to sleep on. The room approves. The Nazar bead on the dice cup gives a friendly blink, as if stamping your policy. Outside, the alley inhales a quieter wind. Inside, the boards click less often, the oud darkens to a purr, and the rumour mill grinds itself into talc, fine enough to carry dreams. You choose what to remember and what to let float away. Keep the fact that bands have visited and left, that reforms have changed hats and changed back, that conversation is a house that survives most renovations. Let go of the sharpest edges. Keep the handles. You sip the last warmth in your cup and set it down with a careful chime, a small ceremony that says, "For tonight, no more headlines, just footnotes of comfort." The city, practical as a mother, tucks you in with a decree of its own. Rest now, enforcement optional. The oud begins almost before you notice, 3 notes like lanterns set afloat, then a careful glide into a makam that seems to uncrease the air. You sink a centimetre deeper into your cushion and feel the room turn its head without actually turning its head. The player's right hand plucks with a feathered risha. The left draws slides that mimic boats changing their minds mid-harbour. You don't need vocabulary to follow. You need a pulse and a willingness to be steered. The mainstream fact sets itself beside your saucer. Ottoman urban nights are thick with music, and the oud ancestor to Europe's lute carries courtly and street repertoires alike, the modal system of makam giving each tune its time of day and temperament. Historians still argue whether coffee houses regularly hosted full ensembles or lean towards soloists and duos after evening prayers, but tonight the single oud is plenty. One instrument can make a room remember how to breathe. A calligrapher settles near a lamp, tools arranged like a tiny altar, reed pens with slanted nibs, a macta board for cutting tips, an inkstone black as a calm sea, papers sleeping beneath a weighted corner. He tests a nib against his thumbnail, then draws a single aleph so straight it could serve as a plumb line for your thoughts. You watch the stroke begin with a whisper fat down, lift to a hairline, then ease off into white space like a boat nosing into fog. He doesn't hurry. His hand rides the breath, not the clock. The scribe from earlier drifts closer, respectful as a shadow, to admire a different script, the playful slope of Talik, the stately dignity of Thuluth, the lapidary neatness of Nask. The 2 men exchange the nod of professionals who know that shapes can behave. Joke 1 rolls in shyly. If handwriting were a passport, this man could cross any border by drawing it. Around you, ink gathers into sentences with the hush of snowfall. The calligrapher rests his wrist on a narrow bridge, so the hand floats above wet strokes, no smudges, no drama. A quirky tidbit sidles up with a grin. Some masters keep a tiny pebble in their sleeve to remind the elbow to stay heavy and the wrist to stay light. Others scent the inkbox with a clove, not for breath, but because the sweet sting persuades the mind to pay attention. He dabs pounced sandarak powder like a ghost of sugar, and letters stop glistening and become facts. Across the room, the oud moves to a melancholy Hijaz colour. You feel the mode tug memory from the corners, friendly but persuasive. The spice merchant contributes a rhythmic clack with his misbaha beads, accidental percussion, while the janissary tests a string with one finger and then pretends he didn't. He drinks sade again, no sugar, as if sweetness would distract the ear. The calligrapher writes a phrase about patience that you can't fully see, and then rotates the page so the lamp oils kiss the curve. Your brain, easily seduced by neatness, sighs. You remember your 5-point pillow on the tavla board, and decide that a good letter form is the typographic equivalent rest for the eye, alignment for the mood. Someone sets a cup in front of you and gestures toward its future. Tonight you will learn foul, the reading of coffee grounds, not as doctrine, but as bedtime entertainment. The ritual is delightfully exacting. Sip until a last spoon's depth remains, swirl 3 slow circles, counterclockwise or clockwise depending on which aunt taught you. Set the saucer on top, flip in 1 smooth invert, and lift after a patient minute, so the drips have time to draw their constellations. You comply, because why not let the night doodle on porcelain? When you lift, the inside of the cup looks like a little cave painting. Lines run like paths, spots bead like caravans. A big blot near the handle resembles a sleepy bear, which you will, of course, interpret generously. Your guide, neither witch nor clown, just a neighbour with practiced eyes, reads with a soft voice. The handle marks you, the rim near it soon, the far rim later. A vertical streak suggests travel, clustered dots suggest money, or raisins, depending on optimism. A clear road down the side suggests obstacles obedient enough to line up for inspection. He pauses to ensure you are being entertained and not recruited. The mainstream footnote sits politely nearby. Tasseography, reading patterns in cups, has near cousins across the region. Ottoman houses knew it as a parlour art, a social spice, never quite theology, rarely entirely dismissed. Historians still argue whether its cradle is Ottoman, Greek, Levantine, Armenian, or a wider Mediterranean habit clothed in local vocabulary. But your cup is not choosy. It is busy sketching a soft horizon you can walk toward even while sitting still. The oud modulates, and a cluster of patrons hums the cadence without words, like blowing on a spoon to cool an idea. Your cup, inverted on its saucer, leaves a small crescent of grounds on the plate, a stray moon. The reader smiles. A journey out, a journey back. You deem that compatible with your established plan of leaving this cushion only to return to a pillow. Joke 2, house-trained and kind, suggests you ask for a forecast of doubles. You restrain yourself because dice and oracles have a complicated relationship. The calligrapher now writes a line from a poet the scribe adores, and resolves a letter with a flourish so modest it feels like a bow. He lifts a second pen, finer nib, sharper tone, and writes your name as a ribbon that somehow remembers your posture. You didn't tell him. He watched. That's all. You promise yourself to write more carefully the next time you make a list, as if your groceries deserve elegant verbs. A quirky side note pads over. Some masters season a new read by soaking it briefly in weak tea, claiming tannins teach the nib humility. Science may shrug. Wrists agree. The pen glides like a skater on a well-kept canal. Music threads ink to grounds. The Meda off-duty for the moment leans on his stick and whispers that every makam has a cousin hour. Rast for morning spine, Ushak for evening ease, Hikaz for sweet ache. He may be making half of that up for charm. You accept it for charm. The oud's low strings thicken. The high ones sprinkle. Your attention becomes a hammock between them. The janissary, who earlier chose silence as his weapon, lets his boot heel keep time so gently only the floorboards hear. You feel the room line up into one organism breath. Pluck, scratch, drip. Your cup reading gets a final reveal. There's a ladder shape near the rim, which your guide promotes to steps upward. Convenient. There's also a smudged bridge, 2 islands, and what could be interpreted as a tiny Nazar eye staring benignly from a swirl. Protection, he says, and the dice cup's blue bead blinks from the other table as if on cue. You think of your old coffee ring archipelagos and how many maps you've collected tonight. Joke 3 leans in. At this rate, you should charge your dreams customs duty when they cross from one island to the next. The calligrapher folds your name into a small card, presses it under a warm cup for a second, the cheapest possible press, and hands it over with a smile that says, "Sleep well." The ink smells faintly of iron, the paper of cotton, the gesture of something older than your anxieties. He returns to his page to copy a proverb about slow hands and steady joys. The mainstream thread reasserts itself. Calligraphy under the Ottomans is more than pretty letters. It is a revered craft tied to devotion and decorum, its masters honoured in court and market alike. Historians still argue whether the coffeehouse encouraged a democratization of that reverence, letting ordinary eyes judge excellence, or whether it merely provided supportive lighting. But judging from the sigh that travels the room when a curve lands perfectly, democracy has at least a vote tonight. The oud lets a final phrase drift to rest like a leaf finding its lake. Your foul reader writes your cup so it can cool, empties the saucer, and taps the porcelain once tiny gavel. Session adjourned. Your name card warms under your thumb. Somewhere a sesva breathes. Somewhere dice pause mid-air like commas. Music, ink, and grounds have collaborated on an editorial for your evening. Fewer sharp edges, more margins, plenty of white space. You put the card away with the peppercorn. Next to the league charter for reasonable bedtimes you keep pretending is a joke. The room, edited and proofed, turns a page without rustling it. You exhale, and your breath matches the oud's last sympathetic hum. You do not need to know tomorrow's weather to fall asleep under tonight's forecast. Letters aligned, fortunes kind, melodies with soft landings. You cradle your cup, the handle points toward you like a small invitation. You accept, with the ceremonial solemnity of someone who understands that ceremonies are simply naps in formal clothing. The last rounds unfold like the end of a lullaby. Fewer flourishes, more gratitude. You rock the dice once, gently, as if patting a sleepy thought back into bed, and send a modest pair across the felt. Your opponent, who has been an excellent neighbour all night, answers with a throw that looks like an apology and plays it like a good guest, tidy and unhurried. Checkers slide with that familiar click that now echoes inside your ribs. The board is not a battlefield anymore. It's a hallway where everyone lowers their voices because evening has put a hand on the banister. You build one more small shelter, cover one last blot that had been peeking out like a mischievous ankle, and feel the homeboard become a well-made room. The janissary, awake again but soft around the eyes, nods approval from his cushion. He appreciates a secure exit strategy, even when no flags are at stake. The scribe watches you bear off and taps his pounce jar once soundlessly, of course, as if to seal the page of this game. The spice merchant, unrepentant optimist, predicts you will roll the doubles that belong to people who remember to breathe. When you don't, he grins as if you did. Generosity is his favourite score. The oud has gone quiet. Its absence is a velvet you didn't know you wanted. In that hush, the brazier sighs. Coals settle, sending up the faintest perfume of cedar and ash sleepy wood, writing a last line with warm breath. The Meda stretches his back with a cat-like wince and gathers his walking stick, tapping it twice against the bar in a private curtain call. Your cup said this time, for a true good night arrives with the companion glass of water, lemon floating like a small, obedient moon. The mainstream fact sits down next to it with the confidence of an old proverb. Water is traditionally served beside coffee in these parts, to clear the palate and to honour the guest. Some say it began so hosts could tell whether a traveller was thirsty first, a kindness disguised as etiquette. Historians still argue whether that custom crystallised in palace protocol, neighbourhood practice, or both. But kindness tends to leak across categories. A breeze steps through the door and the lamps bow politely. Your board answers with its last motions, 2 men off, 1 down, 2 off, and then there are no moves left, only manners. You return the dice to their cup with the care put aside for delicate things. Old letters, baby birds, reasons to forgive. Your opponent and you exchange that Ottoman syllable you love, Ayvala, a small, sturdy bridge between strangers, and begin the careful choreography of closing. The hinges whisper, the latch clicks, the triangles fold, their arguments resolved into a compact truce. Joke 1 yawns into your sleeve. You promise the board a rematch tomorrow-ish, and the board, which has survived centuries of specificity, accepts your calendar entry. The room prepares to end itself without ending you. Cushions regain their unoccupied shapes. Spoons line up like well-behaved commas. The nazar bead on the dice cup gives one last glassy blink in case envy is still lingering by the door in a shawl. The calligrapher sands his final stroke with a breath of powder and slips your name card ink, now matte and sure, into your palm like a travel document to a softer country. The janissary stands, knee cracking with the sound of old wood, and gives you a nod that translates as good game, good night, good luck getting home without tripping over a cat. Your chances of feline navigation are moderate. This city knits its evenings with whiskers. A quirky tidbit gets its goodnight bow. A grey-bearded regular swears that if you set your empty finken upside down on its saucer and balance a single bean on the base, your dreams will arrive alphabetized. The scribe, who keeps alphabets for a living, looks tempted. You, who keep plans like small birds, decline with thanks. Unordered dreams have been doing fine work tonight. You do, however, let the cup sit a moment upside down, not for alphabetizing, but for that tiny hush the gesture imposes, as if telling the porcelain, now you rest too. By the counter, coins change hands with the discretion of good slippers. The proprietor counts slowly, not to flaunt accuracy, but to massage a little more time into the room. He asks, without asking, whether the foam was to your liking, whether the cardamom whispered instead of shouted, whether you felt, for an evening, like a citizen of calm. You answer yes in the grammar of eyes and palms. The mainstream thread strolls through once more. Coffeehouses did more than sell a drink. They sold a posture, a pace, a public privacy that cities need as much as aqueducts. Historians still argue whether these rooms pushed history or cushioned it. But anyone who has survived a day with the help of a chair and a cup knows the right side of that argument is not a single side. You pocket your peppercorn souvenir and placebo and tuck the name card beside it. The Meda tips his stick toward the door like a compass needle. You follow its suggestion. At the threshold, you pause for the customary glance back, not to be dramatic, but to let your eyes make a memory while your feet practice leaving. The last lamp volunteers to be the star of that remembrance, bright enough to engrave a silhouette, dim enough to be kind. Joke 2 winks from the doorframe. You promise the lamp you won't dramatize this goodbye in a poem. The lamp, fluent in human habits, expects to be betrayed. Outside, the alley has traded voices for footfalls. A cat black with white socks, obviously in management, escorts you 3 doors and chooses not to invoice you for the service. The sky is a travelling cloth pinned with small nails of light. Somewhere down the hill, the water answers moon with mirror. You carry the coffeehouse with you the way warm stones hold heat. Not scalding, not showy, just a pocket-sized climate. You recall your coffee ring islands, your 5-point pillow, the league for reasonable bedtimes, and smile at the private atlas you've assembled. One more mainstream note for your pocket. People here say, Bir finkan kahvenin 40 yıl hatırı vardır. A cup of coffee holds 40 years of regard. Historians still argue whether the phrase is older proverb or later embroidery, but the sentiment wraps around your evening like a scarf you forgot you owned. At your door, real or imagined, you practice one last etiquette. You let the day end without filling it with tomorrow. The board is closed. The foam has rested. The dice have gone quiet. The grounds have made their tiny night sky on porcelain and told you, with charming imprecision, that a journey out and back awaits. Joke 3 is barely a breath. You decree that the only opening you'll study now is the opening between sheet and blanket. With that, you lower your shoulders the final inch you've owed them all day. Let the pace loosen now, like laces untied, like a ship's rope coiled soft on the dock. The alley is farther away with every slow step inside, and the room where you sleep is already smoothing its corners to meet you. Breathing becomes a longer sentence. Each inhale a gentle rise. Each exhale a thoughtful comma that lingers. The ceiling is a quiet sky. The pillow is a well-made shore. Your thoughts are small boats that know how to come in without waking the harbour. You set the peppercorn on the table as if it were a tiny planet, and you slide the name card beneath your fingertips until the paper stops asking to be noticed. The memory of the brazier's warmth spreads across your chest, a soft glow that doesn't need tending. In that glow, the backgammon points fold into a calm geometry. The dice become white pebbles at the edge of a stream. The stream moves slowly, and you do not have to cross it yet. You only sit on its bank and listen to water invent the same sound, over and over, until the sound remembers your name.